So I have to say that we really, really enjoyed our time in South Florida, not just Miami. Like we went to Key West, we went to Disney. We enjoyed, first of all, of course, the good weather.
This is Anna. And Anna isn't just describing a great vacation. After immigrating to Toronto from Hungary with her husband, she relocated their HR consulting business to Florida. Everything was going great, but then
The temperature started to change.
Anna isn't talking about the weather.
The political climate started to change.
This was in the lead up to the 2024 election.
Speaking your first language at Walmart, for instance, or any kind of big box store wasn't safe anymore because literally ICE actually went after those individuals who were speaking a language other than English, and they asked for their immigration papers. And I have to admit, I never carried my visa on me, right? We actually started to feel that people were like literally looking at us and talking behind our backs when we were discussing something on our first language.
And the threats weren't limited to Florida. Last February, Bob Ezrin and his wife Jan were vacationing in California when Donald Trump started talking about Canada.
Look, I called him Governor Trudeau because they should be the 51st state, really. And the people of Canada like it.
Now, Bob is Canadian. He's an extremely successful music producer. He co-produced Pink Floyd's The Wall. So he can basically do what he wants, live where he wants, work where he wants.
And at that point, even though we'd rented a place and prepaid to the end of April, we were trying to avoid the winter. But this was February, and we just looked at each other and said, we got to get out of here. This is terrible. And we need to go home.
Around that same time, Jasmine Mooney was entering America. And a problem with her paperwork, the kind of thing you once used to be able to talk your way out of, landed her in detention, which is a nice way of saying in prison.
I was put into that cell, to a jail cell, for 48 hours, not talking to anyone, no answers, sleeping on the cement floor. The cells are freezing cold, and they give you these aluminum foils to wrap over you like a dead body to keep the cold out. They literally put chains around your waist. They put handcuffs on your hands that are attached to your waist. They put chains on your ankles. It's psychological torture in there, truly. They yell at you. They scream at you. Everything in there is meant to break you, like truly meant to shatter you.
Many Canadians have a story like this now. Some are worse than others. Since Donald Trump's inauguration, almost everyone has had a moment of shock. A moment we knew that the world would never be the same. That 200 years of history, 200 years of friendship between the United States and Canada had come to an end. Suddenly, everything is up for grabs. Canada itself is up for grabs. Welcome to Gloves Off, a brand new podcast about the threat to Canada's sovereignty and what we can do about it.
And we have a fight!
I'm Stephen Marche. Canadians like to think of ourselves as good global citizens who get along with everybody. That's our history. That's our nature. And it won't do anymore. The moment demands what the Germans call Realpolitik, a practical, pragmatic approach rather than a virtuous approach to national affairs. Canada needs to think about itself and its place in the world in a frank, even brutal way, because otherwise we might not survive. Recent NATO and G7 summits have demonstrated beyond all doubt that new fact of life for Canada. There are so many questions we have to face now. How to be economically independent is top of mind, but there are others that are darker and more difficult to answer. How can we stop the tsunami of misinformation from overwhelming us? Do we consider conscription as a response to American threats? Should we become a nuclear power? And more basically, what does the new normal without America look like? We're going to go deep. Gloves Off is an 8-part series, and it will feature the people who can best answer the new and terrifying questions that face Canada. Leading intellectuals, military and security experts, as well as ordinary Canadians who are facing the harsh new reality and taking a stand against it. The news cycle during the second Trump administration has taken on a blistering pace. Sometimes Trump talks about annexing Canada, sometimes he calms down. We can't always keep up with the insanity, but two facts remain true no matter what chaos is unfolding. America is falling apart and becoming more violent as it falls apart. Canadian weakness has been exposed as a result of the American threat. And while annexation hasn't been the hot topic for a month or so, Carney recently appeared on CNN to assert it is very much on his radar. The Canadian government and Canadians cannot sleep on this matter. The American chaos is building, not shrinking. And we are on their radar too. So let's get in the weeds. How much trouble are we actually in? Let's get down to it.
Tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico. So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariffs.
The nightmare started with tariff talk. And that was bad, but not unexpected. Trump's comments when he got back into office in January seemed over the top, but within the general framework of what we might call sanity. After all, trade disputes between countries, even friendly countries, are perfectly normal. Then the madness started.
Canada should honestly become our 51st state.
Trump talked about the 51st state many, many times. He mentioned it in his socials.
What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state.
He talked about it in private with Canadian officials and in public during Fox News interviews.
Canada was meant to be the 51st state.
He kept bringing it up. He kept not backing down.
And to be honest with you, Canada only works as a state.
The first reaction, at least for me, was terror. The second was deep anger. The third was that maybe I was exaggerating. Trump says a lot of nonsense. Certainly, when you talk to Americans, they don't take the idea that the U.S. wants to take over Canada seriously. To them, Trump is a troll, a man who famously says whatever's on his mind and sends up trial balloons and manifests as a life strategy. Americans don't pay much attention to foreign policy generally, or to Canada in particular. Meanwhile, they're living through an assault on their Supreme Court, their universities, their civil service. The military is in LA. They're deporting their own citizens. Plus, he has plans to annex Greenland, Panama, and Gaza. He randomly attacked Iran, and who knows what happens next. He's got quite a few internal enemies he's attacking and arresting. So the man is busy. Am I overreacting? Or instead of asking how much trouble Canada is in, maybe we should be asking how much trouble America is in. Maybe that's the right question. How far can the American trouble reach us? To answer that question, I spoke to Barbara Walter, an expert on internal political conflict and the author of How Civil Wars Start.
I mean, we're in trouble in like 100 different ways, so I guess it depends what you want to start talking about.
She has spent her life studying political breakdown and the violence that follows the breakdown. Do you consider the United States as it currently exists part of the free world, or would you consider it an authoritarian state?
No, we have absolutely not achieved authoritarianism. We are somewhere in the middle. We declined into the middle zone pretty rapidly between 2016 and 2020. By the end of 2020, we were in this, what we call anocracy zone. And if you're there in the middle where you have some good things and some bad things, you tend to get a lot of instability. Political violence or serious political violence, and certainly things like civil wars, almost never happen in healthy democracies. What most people don't know is lots of political violence and instability and civil war almost never happen in full autocracies. Now, that's for very, very different reasons. Full autocracies heavily, heavily repress dissent. So even if you're deeply unhappy, you can't do anything about it. But Trump has done two things that are really, really smart. If you are facing a powerful opposition and you want to, let's say, conquer them, he's moved very, very rapidly. So shock and awe. And he's targeted, it's like scattershot. He's targeted everybody at the same time. And what that's done, it's sort of a divide and conquer strategy, right?
I want to ask you a question about the military.
Yeah.
Because people can hate Congress and the media and whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, the internal decline that goes with that. But does this tactic that you're describing Trump using, this dividing, does that work with the military as well?
The institution I have the most faith in holding onto its loyalty towards the Constitution is the military. Does that mean that the military couldn't ever fray and that culture couldn't go away? It certainly could, but it's not going to go away anytime soon.
countries that are in between, in this anacratic state, that are in between democracy, first of all, what do they tend to do in their foreign policy?
If you're a wannabe dictator and you want to take a democracy into autocracy, which means you want to grab power quickly out of the hands of citizens of that country, one of the fastest and easiest ways to do this is to go to war. And you go to war, and then you craft this message that for national security reasons, we have to declare martial law, or we have to restrict the freedoms of individuals because we have to make sure that there are no spies or traitors in our country. So war is a means to consolidate power.
So a wounded and challenged Trump, who does not want to concede power, annexing a neighboring country would be a perfect excuse for him.
There is no political will to go to war with Canada. And Americans are going to see through that.
No, but, like the rhetoric that Putin used before he talked about Ukraine, like these lines are made up. It's virtually the same rhetoric. I'm also starting to notice, like, if you look at polls of, like, do you consider Canada an enemy? Like, the right-wing misinformation streams are already having effects, right? Like, they're already starting to convince, like, maybe it's only 20% now, but, like, in Trump, we do have a figure who's just unbelievably strong at controlling the opinion, particularly the anger of the American middle, right? If you honestly are telling me this is not something we should worry about, I would like to hear that. But on the other hand, from what you said before, it sounds like this is exactly the playbook of autocrats. It's great that you like us, but that doesn't make me feel safer.
War against Canada would be a terrible, terrible choice. Yes, it will appeal to Trump's base. Yes, he might get as much as, 30% of Americans saying, yeah, let's take over Canada. Let's go to war with Canada. It's going to be deeply unpopular with most of America. And the other thing, it would also be political suicide for Trump. One of the things that tends to happen where autocrats get in trouble is when they do military overreach. So they go in thinking it's going to be easy to take over a country because it's weak or it's small. And it's never easy to take over a country. Think about what happened with the United States in Iraq. We failed. We got out. Think about what happened in the United States in Afghanistan. We failed. We got out. And these were much smaller geographically and weaker countries than Canada was.
How do we prepare for the chaos that you see coming?
I think you handled Trump just like you handle a schoolyard bully, right? To his face, you flatter. Oh, you're so strong. Wow, you are so smart. And oh, absolutely, we will do what you want us to do. We will genuflect at your feet. And then behind the scenes, resist, resist, resist. Do not voluntarily comply with his demands. Force him to take the next step. Do not make things easy on him. And you're starting to see Canadians are resisting. To be honest, I think you literally pray to whoever you pray to that the American public will come to its senses, or the American public will prove how resilient and tough and what fighters they are. So, you shore up your own country. You make sure you've got, a good leader in Ottawa. You make sure that the far right that's been growing in your country isn't emboldened by this. You get your own house in order. And so the message that Canada should be sending to the American public is, you have a president who's talking about taking over Canada. That's going to mean a fight. And let us lay out how costly that's going to be and how painful that's going to be to you and for what purpose. Like, what do you get as a result of that?
We are once again at one of those hinge moments of history. Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over.
Barbara Walters' two suggestions, flatter and resist, don't seem particularly reliable or secure. They may be the best options, but they're not exactly guaranteed to work. And the U.S. military, an honorable institution with a long tradition of the duty not to follow orders, can be changed. Trump already has a police force, ICE, who operate without identification or warrants. They're handcuffing U.S. senators. Their loyalty is clearly to the president rather than to the Constitution. The military was willing to do that ridiculous parade he asked for. They're willing to arrest their own citizens in Los Angeles. And large numbers of servicemen and women support Trump. The U.S. is in a state of anocracy, the gray area between democracy and authoritarianism, and the gray is darkening. Anocracy is more dangerous than autocracy. Democracies and autocracies are both stable. The in-between is where the danger comes. And the United States is very much in between. America is a textbook case of a country headed for civil war. Its weaknesses are many: political instability, massive division between its red states and blue states. Incredibly, at this moment in history, Texas has a bigger separatist movement than Quebec. And this, I think, is what is so hard to grasp about our current situation. We should fear America's weakness, not its strength. In collapse rather than in flourishing, America is dangerous to us. Every destruction of institutional life in the U.S. increases the threat to Canada. Authoritarian leaders often justify their power by means of war. Our survival as a country is intimately tied to the survival of American democracy. The 2028 U.S. election is particularly scary. Trump says he plans to run for a third term. That idea is about as crazy as the idea of invading Canada, and the craziness crosses over. Like most Canadians, I never imagined America getting aggressive towards Canada. It just literally never occurred to me, not even in science fiction. So I talked to somebody who has imagined it. His name's Neil Bisson, and he's a retired CSIS agent. That's the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. He's currently the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. And as a former spy, he has a uniquely informed, uniquely troubling perspective.
Yeah, for Canada, this is uncharted waters. I mean, never have we been so dynamically at odds with our strongest trading partner. If you want to look at it from the perspective of our military protectant, I mean, it was always the consideration of Fortress North America. At no point did we ever have a relationship with the United States where we had to worry about our economy being affected so much, about conversations about becoming the 51st state, being annexed. This has never come into the vernacular before. So this affects us in so many ways.
What are our practical vulnerabilities in terms of our ability to hold on to our sovereignty?
Well, I can talk about it from the perspective of a former or retired intelligence officer. Canada is a huge receiver of intelligence from the United States. So when we're looking at it from where are the threats coming to Canada, we think about not just the threats that are coming to Canada, but what are the threats that are coming to North America, because we do have such a porous border. Because one of Canada's main concerns when it comes to national security and intelligence is always the fact that, well, what if something happens and someone transits through Canada into the United States and causes a terrorist act over there, or is involved in something that threatens their national security? This seems to have somewhat changed now, because we're getting the impression from what we're seeing from the Trump administration that he's more concerned about, well, what can I do to focus my national security intelligence apparatus to get me more of what I want, which means what can I do to get more critical resources? What can I do to ensure that our economy, meaning the United States economy, is better than anyone else's? So this changes the entire dynamic that we're used to seeing, where the United States was a huge producer and collector of intelligence, and then they would share the vast majority of that with Canada.
So, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying, because I don't think I've heard anyone talk about this, but it's not just that we're suddenly more vulnerable to America. Mm-hmm. It's that we're actually suddenly more vulnerable to everybody else, because our entire way of interacting with the rest of the world has been a sort of, Robin to America's Batman, if you will.
Yeah, pretty much. But look at the affinity that Trump has for Putin and the relationship that he has with other, let's call them authoritarian regimes, such as North Korea. Traditionally, with all of the other American administrations, these individuals and these countries were seen as threats to democracy and threats to North America. Now this is all changing. So Canada has to take that too, where traditionally maybe we didn't focus as much about what is the threat from North Korea. But now that the Trump administration is no longer concerned about things that they were traditionally concerned about, we now have to expand ourselves and look and say, okay, well, if we're not going to be getting as much information from the United States when it comes to national security threats, how are we going to close that gap? How are we going to be more aware of what's going to happen in our own backyard?
So we're vulnerable to everything now.
We're vulnerable to everything.
We're exposed.
Yeah. I think we're more exposed than we've ever been with what's happening in the United States. And you have basically an individual who is forcing his will upon others when it comes to how he feels decisions should be made. So when he goes to the FBI, when he goes to NSA, when he goes to the CIA, and he has his lieutenants do his work for him, he's telling them directly, I want you to focus on how can we acquire Greenland? I want you to focus on how can we annex Canada? I want you to focus on collecting information that will help me make an argument for purchasing the Panama Canal.
Like, what do you think, like, in the authoritarian playbook, like, what comes next?
So what I think we need to be concerned about is those groups and those individuals trying to lobby or vie for being the next state. And I've seen this already. I've seen this in the media. I've seen some individuals who have stated that, yeah, it'd probably be better off if we were the 51st state. I mean, those voices are few and far between, but you get enough of them voting in a riding, and the next thing you know, you've got a government, or at least you've got one representative from that political party who might be trying to court that, as much as they possibly can.
Yeah.
So that causes that fracture, that causes that break.
Let's say you're prime minister. What are the vulnerabilities that you think Canada faces right now that you would address first? Like, not necessarily the solutions, but like, what are the main vulnerabilities that we face?
The one thing that I've always felt that Canada has lacked, that it needed, is its own foreign intelligence collection apparatus, because that is the unseen hand that has an effect around the world. Whether it's Canada on the political stage around the world, whether it's Canada on the economic stage around the world, having the capacity to get into what's happening around the rest of the world and having agents of influence, having intelligence sources that are telling you about what's happening and how you can best use that to your advantage, that is the unseen diplomacy that happens. That actually positions you to be a strong country that keeps its sovereignty and has influence around the world. So that would be the first thing I would do. The second would be to expand our military and to ensure that our sovereignty, whether it's Arctic sovereignty or sovereignty of Canada, is just ensured by giving us the tools that we need to defend ourselves.
Are you telling me we don't have a foreign? I mean, I was under the impression. So what is CSIS then?
So the Canadian Security Intelligence Service is a national security organization. So their focus, the four things that they focus on, are terrorism, sabotage, foreign interference, and espionage. So those are the main things that they look at. It's very inward looking. It's to ensure that Canada remains safe. Now, I'm not saying that Canada should become involved in the types of dirty tricks like assassinations, of course not. But we do need to have a collection capability that focuses on our economic, military, and political interests, not just our national security threats.
So we're naked. We're really exposed here. I mean, that sounds like we're in trouble.
We don't have the ability to reach out into these other countries and make changes that would have an effect that would be basically positive for Canada. The United States, as big as they are and as much money as they put into their military and into the national security and intelligence apparatus, they can't cover everything all the time. And they're not necessarily welcome everywhere. Canada has a huge advantage over that. We have a large diaspora community. We have people from all over the world who have come to Canada, made a life here, become Canadian citizens. We could use that to our betterment economically, militarily, and politically if we had a separate service, undercover agents who would be working to provide that benefit that I talked about. So maybe in one country, it would be the economic benefit. Maybe there's a country in the world that Canada really needs to try to figure out, okay, how are we going to sell our natural gas and oil to?
Right.
But there are things that happen behind the scenes that make the handshake deal that much easier to happen. The other choice is you simply get to the point where the rest of the world sees how vulnerable you are. One of the things that we had going for us for a very long period of time is that we share that border with the United States, the strongest military in the world. They knew that if they messed with us, they messed with them. Now, what if someone does come over the Arctic? What's going to happen then? Who's going to come to our defense? It might not necessarily be who we thought it was going to be all the time. So in order for us to have a better understanding of what those threats are, we need to have a larger blanket around the world to figure out who's in place in this government that can tell us that this is the plan of attack. This is the next operation that's going to happen. Canada hasn't had that because we've never need to have it.
So, Canada is a naked babe in the woods. And basically, all we have right now is a will to fight. That is something. It's not nothing anyway. It's nice that King Charles came and opened Parliament back in May.
As the anthem reminds us, the true North is indeed strong and free.
But it's not enough. We have been Robin to America's Batman for almost a century. How much trouble are we in? We are in big trouble. Our economy, our military, and our culture have been integrated with our neighbors to the south, and more thoroughly and more consistently every decade since the end of the Second World War. That integration, which has been our main source of safety and prosperity, is now the major source of threat to our survival. The change we face could not be more extreme. It's a 180 in our national life. And not just because America is a threat. Canada is more vulnerable to everybody because America is collapsing. As Bisson said, we have used America to do all our dirty work, and now they won't anymore. And that means we are no longer protected from manipulation by bad actors from everywhere, China, Russia, India, because America is no longer on our side. Canada has never properly had to ask itself what a realpolitik would look like. We've always worked on the premise of a global rules-based order. Our foreign policy questions, our national security questions have been diplomatic questions. How to be good little boys and girls within the transatlantic system, within the World Trade Organization, within Francophonie, within the Commonwealth even. We are being forced into national adulthood. We've got to wear the big boy pants now. And isn't it about time? One of the defining aspects of Canadian identity, I think, is what we don't talk about. We don't do nastiness because we haven't had to do nastiness. And without the nastiness, we get to think of ourselves as better than other countries, more upright, more moral. The new questions are scary and upsetting and sometimes ugly, but there is also something exciting about answering them. All of this has been forced on us, and it's horrible, no doubt, but we're going to find out who we are and what we're capable of, or else we're going to stop existing. But on the most obvious level, we need to get real practical real fast. What do we need to do to survive? How do we make those things happen? Next episode, we'll answer the question, how unprepared is Canada? Economically, militarily, culturally, socially. And we'll do that in the form of a pop quiz, posed to leading experts from different fields and figures from different points of view along the political spectrum, so that we can give ourselves a scorecard that has some kind of reliability. This is Gloves Off. Let us know what you think wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Stephen Marche. Thank you for listening.
The old relationship we had with the United States is over. Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves.
The true North is indeed strong and free.
Oh, Canada.
51st state. 51st state.
Free.
People of Canada like it.
Maybe our greatest state.
And we have a fight.